So you had a beautiful weekend last weekend. I was enjoying watching all of your Instagram stories come through. Did I say that
Yeah.
right? God, I feel like I don't know social media very well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, my Instagram stories. Yes. No, I took a much needed trip to kick off fall and spend some really wholesome family time. And it was so good. And it was like, I even put my phone on airplane mode for a day so that I
So
wouldn't be
neat.
tempted to jump into the chat and like work because
Yeah.
I it's so hard. It's so hard to stop.
Yeah.
But I think it's
We
really
have a problem.
necessary.
It's an addiction, huh? I feel
Yes.
like our addiction for surrogacy is and our love for this means that we work many hours, and then even when we are supposed to stop, I found myself all this weekend putting together a new form that I'm excited to implement with a team, and I'm going, what is wrong with me? Why am I working on the weekend? Because I love what I do.
Yeah, I know it sucks.
uh,
It's
so,
beautiful, and it also we have to be more intentional about spending our free time in ways that are beneficial to our families as well.
yeah,
So that's what
I
I was
know.
trying to focus on, spending more quality time. So that was really fun. And also fall is so beautiful. I love fall. It's my favorite season, like by
Mhm.
far.
It's fun.
Especially in Georgia, because it's been so hot. It's been like so hot that I haven't worn a bra for like 6 months. And so now I can now I can, I guess, lucky me, and must
I
wear a bra.
mean, listen, we live in a world now that we can work online and we can just make sure that we're presentable from here up. It works.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to get back on the bra game. Not
No,
going to happen.
man, that's a crime. So listen, I'm so excited to have Joe on. He is, well, I think I hate saying this, but he's one of our favorites. We
I
have all of our
know.
kids are our favorites. All of our agencies are our favorites, but Joe has a special place. Joe and NYSC at New York. They have a special place in our heart because we've been doing this with them since the beginning.
I think that as far as agency relationships go, and long-standing agency relationships, New York Surrogacy Center has been a good model for what it should look like collaborating with Surrogacy Is to support women and have them have the journey that we want them to have and the journey that we would have wanted for ourselves to have. So, and they're also a testament to the fact that it's not about having the highest compensation, because New York Surrogacy Center rarely, if ever, is offering the highest base compensation, but they're chosen time and time again because of the other beautiful things in their process that they offer, including Joe. So
Yes,
Joe
he's in
is
it.
super popular because he knows how to take care of these people, and he cares about them, and it shows, and they know that they're going to be in good hands. Because if anybody ever asks in our Facebook group, I have this option, this option. If New York's on there, they're like,
Oh, it's great.
everyone jumps into the comments. Choose New York Surrogacy Center. They're the best ever.
I know.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, another one for New York.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
How's it going?
We're good.
Really good. We've been
Busy.
so looking forward to seeing you and having you on this podcast because we have so many questions for you. And
Excellent.
Surrogacy has a lot of Joe and New York Surrogacy Center super fans. So
Oh, is
I know
that right?
everybody's going to be excited to hear kind of your story and everything that you have, that's brought you here. So we're really
You're
excited.
kind of famous on our private Facebook group. Your
I love
name,
that.
if we searched it, Joe, everybody would be like, Joe's so amazing. Joe's great. Joe's this. Do you remember when we first met? Actually, it's funny because when we were onboarding agencies and trying to figure out which agencies it made most sense for us to be aligned. And one of my first questions to you was, okay, Joe, I've never had somebody as intake as a man. And what do you feel about that? And then you're like, oh no. And you did. You totally showed me these women love you. Like, what
I
is
do
going
remember
on
that.
right now?
That's right. Yeah, no, it's been great. And you guys have such great candidates. We love working with people through your program there. So it's been a really great couple of years of partnering with you guys.
Oh,
Yeah,
I love that.
absolutely.
It really
I'm so
has.
glad that we found you guys when we did. And it
Same.
was, a crazy time, post-COVID world, and then also New York law that I know that you guys had a big part in shaping. So we're excited to talk with you
Yes.
about that. But I guess just for starters, if you want to tell us about your background as an attorney and in family law and kind of what led you to this place where you are now and to starting New York Surrogacy Center when you did.
Yeah, for sure. So I am an attorney, and so that was my how I got into this field at all. I started doing like regular traditional family law, representing clients in divorces and custody cases, and sort of very quickly realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do forever, because that's not, it's hard. So I sort of switched gears into some different areas of family law. I got very involved in working with adoptive families and doing a lot of adoption work, and sort of discovered this whole world of like family formation law rather than like family dissolution. And so I worked with a lot of adoptive parents. And at the time in New York, surrogacy wasn't legal. Compensated surrogacy wasn't legal. So, if you had a sister or a friend or someone who was willing to do it for no compensation, it wasn't prohibited, but compensation was. So there really wasn't a lot of surrogacy happening in New York for a long time. And so when I would meet with clients to talk to them about, I want to start a family, I want to have a child, I want to, what are my options? They were pretty limited for a long time. And so we talked about adoption a lot. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. Um, and then, discovering there's this like whole other world of surrogacy and assisted reproduction, and working with clients who did have a sister or a family member or someone who was willing to go through that process for them, but then also realizing and talking with clients that we need to change the laws here, because it's really not fair for intended parents who want to pursue a journey close to home in New York. And it's really not fair for women who want to act as surrogates and go through this process, but just happen to live in New York and so they can't or couldn't. So that's kind of where the bug started to really push towards changing these laws. And there are other professionals, surrogacy attorneys who have been in this fight as well, and who have been, working on draft legislation and lobbying for changes and things like that. So we really joined in with them to try to push for that.
Well, you and Casey were kind of the lead in that push, right? To really kind of make that change happen. How did you and Casey meet? Because I think if I remember correctly, you had mentioned through the adoption agency that you were working for.
Yeah, so it wasn't an agency, but we were both working for a law firm together. So we were both attorneys, kind of practicing in the same area, and sort of knew each other that way. And then we sort of connected and started working together in the same law firm. And so we've been working together for several years now, both interested in the same types of law, adoption, and assisted reproduction and surrogacy. And Casey's mom, Anne, who you met, Casey, has also been an adoption assisted reproduction attorney for years and years and years and years. And so, she got us connected with a lot of organizations of attorneys who, practice in this area. And we, met a lot of other attorneys who were also interested in, working on changes to the law in New York. And so that's sort of where it was, largely an attorney group that sort of came together. And there are, several others. It certainly wasn't Casey and I that were the only ones involved in this process. There were many other attorneys who were involved in drafting legislation, lobbying for legislation changes. It took several years of failed attempts before it actually happened. But yeah, we were involved in a relatively small group of attorneys who did a lot of going. We live in Albany, which is where the Capitol is, so it was super easy for us to be able to go and talk to legislators and people at the Capitol. But we also brought in intended parents and surrogates and medical professionals and mental health professionals and all the other sorts of players in the surrogacy world to also sort of, it may not come as a surprise, but like a lot of like legislators are totally clueless about what surrogacy is and how it works, and like the bare basic minimums, like what an embryo transfer is, and like just no clue. So I think that part of the reason that it took so long was a lot of education that needed to happen about like what it is and why it's important and why these laws are crazy, because we were one of only a very few states that prohibited surrogacy, and it's so strange that New York of all places, which is like progressive, and you would think like New York, how could that be one of the states that has these horrible surrogacy laws, but we did for a long time. But
well, and then in 2020, it was then legal to pursue surrogacy as long as you were licensed and that you met all the criteria. There are still a ton of hoops that you have to jump through to get to that place. But you guys are one of the first agencies that was licensed to move forward in the process with surrogacy. Is that correct? The first or one of the first?
I think that we were the first. We have the first license number from the Department of website, which is great. So yeah, it was like April, I think, of 2020. So like heart of COVID was when it finally passed. This law, it's called the Child Parent Security Act, is the name of the law that finally legalized surrogacy. It's a big comprehensive piece of legislation. So it did a couple of different things. Legalizing surrogacy was one of them. It also created this whole mechanism for what needs to be included in a surrogacy agreement, eligibility criteria, how to get a pre-birth order. It included a surrogate's bill of rights, which we can talk about. It had this whole section about how that establishing parentage for children that are born using egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation. So lots of different components, but the big one for our purposes is it legalized surrogacy, and it did also create a requirement that any surrogacy agencies that want to work with New York surrogates, they have to be licensed by the Department of Health in order to do that. So we were definitely the first, and I think still the only state that has a licensure requirement for surrogacy agencies. It is an additional step for sure to go through the process of getting licensed, but I think it's a great thing. I think it's a good thing, and I think that it's something that we'll probably continue to see in other states. The big concern when going through the whole legislative process and some of the pushback that we were getting was wanting to make sure that women who were acting as surrogates were being protected and not exploited and had all of their rights protected, and they had everything that they were supposed to have. And one of the ways to ensure that in this legislation was to have this oversight of surrogacy agencies by the Department of Health. And so, the Department of Health is responsible for monitoring surrogacy agencies and making sure that they're doing things the way that they're supposed to be done and making sure that they're following the law and everyone is protected. And so it, I think it was positive. It added some time. We had to then go through the process of applying and getting licensed, but ultimately, I think it's a good thing.
And I know that was challenging for a lot of agencies that have been operating in the United States for a long time,
right.
To jump through those hoops and go through that process. But I do see it as a really positive thing. And I'd love to hear more about what you think as far as the Surrogate Bill of Rights. Like, how did that come to be? And I guess,
what does that include?
What does that include? And do you think that this is something that all states should adopt, even though it's kind of a bureaucratic nightmare to go through the process? Is it worth it for other states to get on board and do this? And what does that protect people from?
Mm-hmm.
So the Surrogates Bill of Rights is, and again, this is a thing that's unique to New York, but basically there's this whole section of the law that says, these are the list of rights that every surrogate is entitled to, no matter what your contract says, no matter what your agency says, like these are the rights that you have. And it's the right to have health insurance coverage that will cover surrogacy, the right to have life insurance coverage in place throughout the duration of your process, the right to have independent legal counsel representing you throughout the contractual process, the right to make any health and welfare decisions regarding yourself and your body during the pregnancy. So one of the things that I think was a benefit for us in New York was because we were so late to the game in legalizing surrogacy, we kind of had the ability to see what other states had done and what was successful and what was not successful and where there were gaps. Um, because some states have, California, Illinois, like they have surrogacy statutes. Some states just don't have any laws about surrogacy, and it's allowed because it's not prohibited type of thing. So, we were able to look to other sort of legislation from around the country and see what was working, see what wasn't working, but also look to like the industry and see what are like the best practices, what are ASRM's best practices, look to things like seeds and other entities about, what should be included, and put together this, what we kind of viewed as like model legislation that covered all of the things that should be included. So, it incorporates, screening criteria from ASRM. It incorporates things like, having independent legal counsel, not each person having separate attorneys, life insurance, health insurance, all those types of things. So I think that it was meant to be the way that it was like sort of framed for legislators was, this is super protective of surrogates. There's no fear that women will be exploited by going through this process, which was one of the things that they articulated as a concern for legalizing surrogacy. But I think that in the end, it really, it benefits everybody, because following best practices, can intended parents save some money by not having their surrogate have independent representation? Maybe, but it's not worth it, right? In the end, and anytime there's a dispute, so it makes the process, and we haven't really gotten, any real pushback from intended parents about these things that maybe are extra in New York that wouldn't necessarily be required in other places. But that was the idea, and I think it's a good thing. And then the Department of Health is sort of responsible for making sure that surrogacy agencies are actually doing that, and doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. And when you go to apply for licensure through the Department of Health, you have to provide, your, in addition to like background checks and things like that, there's that you have to provide them with all of your written policies and procedures about
And I
what
love
your
that.
entire program works, what you do, how you make sure that all of these things are being met, so that they can confirm that that is in fact happening. And if there's an issue, right, if a surrogate's not receiving life insurance coverage like she's supposed to receive under the Bill of Rights, there's recourse, because the Department of Health is then there to make sure that those things are happening. And so agencies have an incentive to make sure that they're being compliant, because their license counts on it.
Yeah. Well, and more than that, so, you have the ASRM guidelines, and we hope that, these agencies are following those guidelines, but
Right.
so often you can't guarantee that. And that's one thing that I really appreciate that what New York has done is it's really established this baseline to say, these are the standards. You can't not do them, right? You can't
Right.
not provide that surrogate with a life insurance policy, because we want to protect this process and protect her and her family, hoping that it never comes to that. But you never want to get to a place where you're wondering, well, wait a minute, why does she not have life insurance and something's happened? So, and then I really actually appreciate, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's not even just the minimum of the 250 that the guidelines say for the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. It's actually saying 750,000. Is that correct? That they
Yeah, for
require
life
to have?
insurance, it's 750,000 is the threshold.
And I appreciate that, because that's been Sunshine and our mission to onboard any of the agencies that we work with at Surrogacy is that they have that minimum of that 750. We'd like to, sorry, let me rephrase that, 500,000, but we push for that 750, because for us, it just, why wouldn't you? It's maybe $100 more to
I was
purchase
going to
that
say,
policy
the
to
cost is
protect her.
not in the
It's
grand scheme
minimal.
of this process. The
No.
cost of that additional life insurance policy is so minimal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the area where you want to save your
Right.
pennies.
No, right. No. And I think that it really comes down to there's not very many agencies that are licensed, because we know that process is really extensive. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through, but those agencies that are licensed in New York, to me, there's a stamp kind of on their agency that they've really gone through all the necessary things to be considered a really great ethical agency. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's gold in itself. How long does that process take for somebody to get licensed? Because I know it originally
was
was what,
long.
like 2 years almost. Now is
It's
it a little bit shorter?
I think that so the law went into effect in February of 2021, and I think we were licensed by May. So it took us a couple months.
You guys were the
But
exception, because we are hearing months and months and months. I mean,
Well,
maybe it was
maybe
because
they were
we're
in
the
the
first.
front of the line, and
Yes.
we
so
were definitely, maybe we were probably the first application that they got. So they didn't have a
Yeah.
backlog yet. Maybe that's
Yeah.
why.
yeah, and it slowed down exponentially from there because I
But
know a lot of agencies had a hard
yeah,
time.
yeah.
It's like DMV status, standing in the line. You know you're going to be there all day long.
I'm curious what it is now, though, because I know it started out rough, but maybe they've got a better system in place now that more agencies are applying. And I was actually looking at the list recently of all the agencies, and I did see
Mhm.
that New York Surrogacy Center was #1 on the licensure list. And I thought that's so cool.
Yeah.
But now there's like a lot more agencies than I expected to see
Yeah.
on that list that are licensed, and ones that I hadn't even heard of before. So I'm like, I wonder if these are new agencies or. And then I'm curious too, with you and Casey, when you decided to come together and start New York Surrogacy Center, what was your like driving principle when you guys sat down at the table and you're like, we don't want to jump on with another agency that exists. We want to start our own program. What was behind that decision, and what was kind of your guiding principles in creating the foundation for New York Surrogacy Center?
Yeah. I mean, part of it was there weren't any agencies in New York, and so there wasn't any agency to jump onto. But we also, we have always said that the favorite part of our practice, of our law practice, has been doing surrogacy cases and representing surrogates, representing intended parents in the legal process. But you guys know the legal process is like a sliver of the
Yes.
whole surrogacy journey, and so it's a super important part of the process, obviously, but it's just a piece, and not the most exciting piece either. So we really wanted to be involved in more of the process. And, we because we were, very, familiar with kind of how the process works and what all that goes into it, you have to be in order to competently draft a surrogacy agreement. Um, we just wanted to be more involved in the process than just being involved in the legal piece. So we started. We were hoping that the law change was coming in the future, and so a couple of years before the law actually changed, we started planning for our hopes to be able to start a surrogacy agency if and when the law did finally change. So we had some time, a couple of years, because each year we thought was going to be the year, it wasn't, and then it went back the next year but so we had a couple of years to plan. And then during the height of COVID, our things really slowed down with law practice because the courts closed for a while, and so we really had some time at that point. And it kind of coincided, the law passed in the beginning of COVID, everything was kind of shut down, and so we really took that time to really kind of finalize our how we wanted to do things, how we wanted to structure the agency. And it's changed 100 times since then. We've grown and sort of morphed and figured out what has worked and what hasn't worked, and things like that. But that's really when we started, and we just wanted to be more involved than just handling the legal piece. And so now we don't do any of the legal work for any of our cases through the agency. We still do some legal work separately, but for any matches that come through New York Surrogacy Center, we don't do the legal work. We want to make sure that everybody has separate, outside, independent attorneys that they can talk to that just represent them. So, which I think is an
I
important
love that. I
Yeah.
deal.
actually didn't know that. So thank you, because I know a lot of times there are agencies that are started by attorneys or have
Yeah,
attorneys on staff or in ownership, and then they usually will push intended parents to use that attorney to draft their contracts. And I always felt
yeah,
like that was a little bit of a conflict. And I think it's really important to have that clean line.
Mhm.
yeah.
Not that you would do any, or there would ever be a conflict where you would be prioritizing yourself above your client or prioritizing your agency above your client. We hope, right? But we never want to even have the appearance of that. And so I think that's really, really
Right.
a smart choice that you guys
Right.
have made. And I get
Yeah.
why other agencies don't want to do it that way, because maybe it's more lucrative to run all of that stuff
Yeah,
through
for sure.
your law practice. But it's cool. That's just another good example of why we love you guys, because you do the right thing, like on instinct, not, that's just kind of a really good
Well, and I
positive
Well,
was,
example of that.
if
I was
there's ever a
actually just,
dispute, like, oh,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what I was just going to say. We recently came up against that, right, Joe? So it's like making
Right.
sure that you can be in the middle and protecting both parties. And if you're
Right.
representing the intended parents, you really don't have that ability to do that. Or
Right.
for the surrogate to feel confident that my
Right.
agency has my back, they're going to step in when necessary to support that process.
Right.
I think we have an extensive amount of hoops that we have our agencies jump through when onboarding them. I think you probably can attest to that, Joe. And I was looking originally at our numbers. We have about 71, 70, a little over 70 closed cases, and then active with you guys a little over 50. And for me, that's exciting because you are one of the agencies that really truly has stepped into those and really being a partner in this process for us to really come together to support these women. And I remember one of the expectations is we want the agency to run background on not just the surrogate, but the intended parents. And then you guys were already running background on the surrogates, but that was something we had said, hey, we need this. And you guys were equipped and ready to do it and make those things happen to support both parties. So there's just so many reasons why we appreciate what you guys are doing, but just a testament to the work that you guys are doing over there.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that, and we love it. It's easy to do because it's, you guys know it's the best. Being involved in this process is the best thing ever.
Yeah.
I'm
It really.
curious, how many births has New York Surrogacy Center had now? Because it's been a while since you started and you were a little green baby sprout of an agency. And now you guys are a full blown experienced agency. And I'd love to hear kind of some of the wins in that, how many births, and what are some of the moments that really stick with you that you just know that you're doing what you're meant to be doing?
Yeah. I would say I'd have to look to be really accurate, but probably about 15 or so, which is awesome. I
That's
remember very
awesome.
clearly the very first one.
Yeah.
Because it was, our first one as an agency, and I think that it was also one of the very first surrogacy births in New York since the law changed, which was also really cool. So it was, I definitely very much remember that, and we have a great relationship with their surrogate and with those intended parents. They're back for their second journey currently, and so it's, a lot of the coolest moments are when we do a lot of work, a lot of the work behind the scenes of especially the matching process. I think that for me is the one of the most enjoyable parts, and one of the most important parts of the process is we try really hard to not have a matching process that is who's next on the waiting list, you're up, you guys go together type of thing. We try to be very thoughtful and customizing as much as we can about what everyone's priorities are and all that type of stuff. And so when surrogates will send us pictures from the embryo transfer, and everyone's out to dinner together, and we see all of these, the people that we have been working with, and they're together in person and enjoying each other's company, and it's just those are the coolest moments. It's so you forget how real life impact some of this stuff really has on not only the intended parents and their families, but the surrogates too. And so seeing baby pictures, of course, hospital pictures, of course, are amazing. But anytime, getting together for a baby shower, and it's just so nice to know that we helped bring you guys together and create this dynamic
special.
in this relationship, and it's just so I love when people send us pictures like that.
And that just ripples out too for so long. And it makes me, I really connect what we all are doing now back to when I was teaching, because you have students that come through your classroom and they are so important to you in that moment, but then they're only there with you for a short time and then they go on. But those little things that we do, even in the matching process, even as we're helping people through these journeys, like their surrogacy journey is huge to them and it's a huge part of their life. And that we get to have that little impact, even if they don't necessarily feel all the touches that we add. I just think it's really cool, the knowledge that we're doing something so important that has such a ripple effect outwards that's impacting grandparents and
Yeah,
these children that are going to
right.
be born.
That's a
And
good point.
then those children are going to have children one day. And it's just like, it's so cool to take part in something that's so much bigger than yourself. I
Yeah.
love this work for that
It's my
reason.
favorite thing. It's my favorite thing.
Yep.
Now, I know the law for surrogates in New York also kind of, there's an extra layer for any surrogate that's in New York that has this additional support with the insurance. Can you talk a little bit to that topic of really what benefits if she lives in New York might be,
Hmm.
to her disposal?
Yeah. So one of the things that the law requires currently is that intended parents, if she has surrogacy friendly insurance, and luckily in New York, the vast majority of insurance policies are surrogacy friendly. That's something that sort of came hand in hand with the law change. There was this sort of, I don't know if directive is the right word, but from the governor's office that, insurance policies had to cover surrogacy just like they cover any other pregnancy. So, we've found, I think, in all of the cases that we've had in New York, only one insurance policy that hasn't been surrogacy friendly, which, it's hit or miss anywhere else. Um, but, so that's a nice benefit, really for intended parents of working with surrogates in New York. But, if assuming a surrogate does have surrogacy friendly insurance, the intended parents are required to pay her insurance premium, so reimburse her for whatever the cost is. And if she doesn't have surrogacy friendly insurance, of course, they'd be required to obtain that for her. But they're required to keep that in place and pay those premiums throughout the whole journey and for a year afterwards. Um, and same goes for life insurance. So throughout the duration of the surrogacy journey and for a year after the journey ends, um, you know, after the birth, to make sure that, not only while she's pregnant is she having this coverage, but in the months following, in case there are any issues that come up, bills that come up, complications that come up, anything like that, there's this additional period of a year where they have to keep those things in place too. So,
Yeah.
and that is definitely something that is not the case anywhere else. Um,
No.
so that's
And,
a,
and
a
it is
definite.
it's a benefit to the surrogate. I understand it's an additional cost for the intended parents, but I mean, wow, what a big deal it would be for a surrogate who is in New York to be able to have that
Right,
additional support
totally.
for that year. It's a big deal. So
Yeah. And
um,
a lot of intended parents are like freaked out by the idea of that because it's like, oh my god, an extra year of health insurance. But the thing that I would encourage intended parents to remember is that a lot of insurance policies, almost all in New York, have been and are surrogacy friendly. And so the cost associated with reimbursing a surrogate for her premiums through like an employer health insurance plan, even for 2 years, is probably significantly less than purchasing a art risk plan
mhm.
for a year somewhere else. So it really
Mhm.
is something that intended parents are like, whoa, I don't want to work with New York, that's crazy, like so expensive. But it hasn't shaped out to be that way at all.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's actually. I remember talking with you and saying, we have some other agents who are licensed in New York, and they were kind of gearing away from pulling that process. Like, I don't want to work in New York or surrogates in New York, and you were like, that's silly because that premium actually shakes out to be potentially less or about
Usually,
average.
yeah,
Yeah.
Especially if
Okay.
you had to get a Lloyd's of London policy or something, like those can be like
brutal.
as much as the surrogate's compensation in some cases, or
Yeah.
almost,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I hate insurance. It's like that. I hate talking about it because it enrages me. But just if
I
I
know.
think I'm paying like $900 a month for my own insurance policy, and I'm like, I should just really put that money away into a savings account and just save up for if anything happens, because it's just astronomical. It's
It is
so
crazy.
much money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is
But
for
yeah,
sure.
that just I can't even touch it. It makes me so mad.
All right,
But
move on. Yeah.
yeah, get out of here. It's like, let's. I'm like debating on moving to Europe all the time. But what advice do you have for other attorneys or professionals that are entering into or wanting to explore getting licensed in New York, practicing surrogacy, whether it's surrogacy law as an attorney or agencies coming in? What advice do you have for participating in surrogacy in the New York landscape?
Yeah. I think obviously part of it, anytime you want to start practicing anywhere, is to make sure that you fully understand the law. One of the nice things about New York is that it is a super nice and not nice. It's a super comprehensive law, so it's like very long and very dense and like not a fun read by any means, but it is a very comprehensive law. It really outlines the whole process, very clearly about, what needs to be included in an agreement, how the Surrogates Bill of Rights works, all the, the timing of things, this has to be in place prior to starting meds. You have to make sure escrow is funded prior to starting meds, like making sure that really it's a really comprehensive outline of how things are supposed to be done. But, there's, it's anybody can like read the statute and sort of like figure out like the basic requirements for a surrogacy agreement. I think that anyone who would be interested in sort of getting into the field of surrogacy at all really needs to do whatever it takes to kind of understand the process. And that for me was one of the, switching gears from surrogacy attorney to surrogacy agency. That was a lot of stuff that we learned about the process because, again, the legal piece is a piece. There's so much that comes before the legal piece and so much that comes after the legal piece. And so, I don't, other than just sort of getting in there and doing it and working with people like you guys and other people who are like in this world and kind of know how it works. We met with fertility clinics and like went and toured fertility clinics and learned from different clinics about what your process is. What do you look for when you're screening surrogates? How does your process work for intended parents? We've gone in on several like clinic tours, and I think that was super helpful to get a good, solid understanding of the medical side of the surrogacy process. Talking with former intended parents and surrogates who have gone through the process and sort of hearing about their journeys and good and bad. What's worked, what doesn't work, and then, a lot of it also has just been sort of trial and error and figuring out, something happened in this case and I want to make sure that I remember to address this next time. So, again, good or bad, whether it's something that we want to adjust to make sure that, there's a better experience in the future or like, oh, this went really well. We want to make sure we make this part of our process. So it's been a great experience and it's not over by any means, but yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so much to it. There's so many moving pieces to a surrogacy journey. I'm still learning all of the ins and outs of the insurance stuff, every day. It changes all the time.
Well, and it will. I feel like, unfortunately, back to the
and
darn
hopefully it changes for the better someday.
Yeah, right. One could hope. I am curious. You touched on the topic that if you're licensed in New York, it's required to have fully funded trust accounts. What does that look like? Is there a minimum? Is there a process to that? Do they look at the entire benefit package? What is it, the requirement around that?
So the statute doesn't specify like a dollar amount, but what it says is that prior to starting meds, so we interpret that as prior to legal clearance, there is that the escrow account is funded, and what needs to be included is sufficient funds to cover base compensation and reasonably anticipated additional expenses. I think that's the terminology, something like that.
Sure.
So there's a little bit of like flexibility to figure out what that means.
Okay.
But we view that as, what are your health insurance premiums for, if it's New York, 2 years,
2
basically,
years.
the surrogacy journey plus 12 months.
Yeah.
So, life insurance premiums, health insurance premiums, what do we anticipate for childcare? Or is it a surrogate who uses her parents for childcare and there's not going to be a childcare expense? Or is it someone who's always going to need a paid sitter, and how much is their sitter charge? So that there we have, the way that we technically do it is we have like a spreadsheet where we kind of input, what are the anticipated travel expenses? Is the surrogate within driving distance of the clinic, or is she going to be flying multiple times?
Lost wages, and kind of
Lost
just
wages,
calculate the
exactly.
whole thing.
All the
Okay.
different variables, we try to do some of them are fixed, right? Like we know what our
Yeah.
compensation schedule is. We have an idea of, what the legal fees are going to be for the attorneys. But then for those variable ones like lost wages and childcare, based on her specific circumstances, we do our best to try to estimate what that's going to look like, add a buffer just to be sure. And then we tell the intended parents, here's what we'd be looking for to fund the escrow account, and then don't issue legal clearance until it's there.
Yeah. You know what? That's a true benefit to the surrogate. And I know that there are a lot of agencies that don't require a trust account to be fully funded. And what then happens is a surrogate proceeds forward, does the cycle calendar, gets pregnant, and now is locked into this process with a trust account that the parents are then for the rest of the journey trying to chase down that money through the agency. It just seems a little reckless, in my opinion, that would even be an option for this process, but it is, because there isn't really a regulation around it.
Right.
So that's something you guys are doing right, and we appreciate that. We have many expectations of our agencies and our partners that we partner with at Surrogacy Is, and that's one of them that we want to know and make sure that we can confidently protect this process for the surrogate.
And we get asked all the time, like, oh, we don't need all of the money right now, so let's put in half and then we'll give you the rest in 6 months. No.
No.
I get upset about that, but the last thing we ever want to have an issue with is tracking down money and having those kind of disputes in the middle of a process. And again, this is a benefit for surrogates, but even though intended parents might not love it, it's a benefit for everybody.
Yeah, it is.
Because we never want to be in a situation where the opposite happens. So, and again, I don't mean to say we get a ton of pushback. We don't really, we make sure intended parents are aware this is what's going to be expected. This is what it looks like. But yeah, I think definitely important.
Majority of our partner agencies, as our advocacy side is concerned, that's a priority, right? That we want to make sure that that's an option. And those agencies haven't given any kind of pushback on that. I know, actually, and I'd love to hear from your perspective. So you've had Surrogacy Is in your corner as far as sharing some of the surrogates that we have in our program as an option. New York Surrogacy Center is one of the options. How has that process been, having Surrogacy Is in your corner as far as the advocacy side goes, and knowing that we go and do the ongoing support? Has that been a benefit? I know you're probably going to say it's a benefit, but I'm just curious. Is it annoying?
No, not at all. It's
your girls?
Fantastic. It's whenever I do an intake with someone who is looking to be a first-time surrogate, there's a wide range of where they're coming from, where they are in the process, how much they know. Occasionally it's someone who saw an ad on Facebook, doesn't really know much of anything about surrogacy and is just looking into it, is interested to see what it's all about, versus someone who's very, very knowledgeable about the process, already knows everything that I'm about to tell them about how it works. And so there's really a wide range. I always, love when the level of depth that we can get into during an initial conversation about the process also depends on how familiar they are with how surrogacy works. And so I always love working with candidates through Surrogacy Is, because I know that you guys already do a lot of that. There's this preliminary educational piece and advocacy piece, and explaining the process and explaining what to expect and explaining realistically what agencies are looking for and what intended parents are looking for. And so, it's having a initial conversation with someone who is coming through Surrogacy is like having a second or third conversation with, someone who hasn't come through Surrogacy Is, because they already have a lot of that foundational stuff. And the other thing too, which I think is great, is surrogates who work with you guys are a lot more able to to know what to ask for, to know what's important, to think about, let me ask about, is it going to be included if I want to bring a travel companion with me to my embryo transfer? Things that someone who hadn't had that, who doesn't have like an advocate working with them would never, possibly never think to ask about. And those are included things. It's not like they have to ask for it to get it, but it's, you can tell by like the types of questions that they're asking that, they've had the chance to really explore those things and think about them. And then as we go through the journey, things come up all the time, right? Like, and so, we're here to answer questions and be a support system and try to work through any issues that come up. But it's always great to also be able to say, well, why don't you reach out to your advocate too, and if you have any sort of specific questions. And it helps us, right, because it's an extra support that we can rely on, but it certainly helps them too, because it's sort of like a neutral person outside of the agency where they can get another opinion. And whether that's things are going great or things are, there's some sort of an issue that's come up and they want additional support. So no downside at all. They tell us all the time, many times that, I also talked to my advocate about this, and like we can, it helps throughout the whole process for sure. I think that it's I can tell that there
when we're
is comfort
collaborating
associated.
Yeah. We recently, Sunshine and I were on fire. We had an agency say, well, we're just selling leads. And I said, if they only knew, man, if they only knew the amount of support and staffing that we have to truly support these women to make sure that this is their choice, but that they're having an educated choice, So we present agencies. We don't say, guess what, New York is your agency. We say, here's an amazing agency. Here's what makes this agency stand out. Here's what we know about this agency and what your experience is going to be. And we present them several options, and then they choose their option. So there's that choice in that. And then they have that extended support that they have for their surrogate advocate for the rest of the journey. It doesn't end. It doesn't end. And so for us, I think when we heard that, it's like, you know what? So two pieces to that. They need to understand what Surrogacy Is does. So now we're really wanting to talk to that topic, because we do have some amazing partner agencies, and you are on the top of that list. We adore New York Surrogacy Center and the collaboration, and I think it will continue, just because there is that give and take. You see the value that we bring, and we see the value that you guys bring to be able to make this happen, to support these women and these intended parents. So it's a big deal.
Were on the phone like 3 times a week.
We were. I was like, you had me on speed dial, I think, at some point there for a little bit, Joe.
But it's true. And, even like the Facebook forum that you guys provide is something too that, surrogates come and say like, hey, like I was talking to, I saw this in the Facebook group and we were talking about this and I was curious about that. And so, that's, we have our sort of own Facebook group, but it's a much smaller scale. But, we always encourage, and I always ask them, are you part of the group? Like, if you're not, make sure you should be, because there's a lot of,
I love that show. I'm so glad you said that, because it is a benefit to them, and they can go in and search. We created that space to be a safe place with no mean girls allowed, because there's so many mean groups where you have to have a PhD to ask a question, which is so bizarre to me. That's a quick way to have these women decide, you know what, I don't think surrogacy is for me because I asked a question and I was.
Some of the groups are brutal. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, my gosh.
Yeah.
I love that. And I also love when we have surrogates choose New York Surrogacy Center, because I know there are going to be those things that come up. There's always going to be things that come up that you're in communication with Casey or with Christina or someone on our team to help a surrogate navigate through a situation where maybe there was miscommunication, or maybe she needed help learning how to ask for what she needed, or whatever it was. We always know that we can come to you and that you'll help resolve it. And also that those things don't arise very often with New York Surrogacy Center. Like, we never have somebody coming and saying, nobody answers my calls, nobody answers my emails. Like, they always say, yeah, if I have a question, I can get a hold of Joe. I can get a hold of somebody easily. And so they don't need us as much, which is ideal. What we
Yeah.
want is partner agencies where we are here as an additional support, but they don't need us. And when we do have those agencies where we're really needed a lot, we try to coach the agency and say, hey, here are some points of contention, and here are some things that we see that maybe you could do to get ahead of this so it doesn't happen as often. And when they're not willing or able to, work with us on that, then we end up having to stop referring to those agencies because it creates so much extra work for our team to support these women
Yeah.
because the agency isn't. And I love this relationship because it really is the model of what we want for a partner agency, that we know when the surrogate comes to you, if she has an issue, she feels comfortable telling you and she's going to have it addressed. I just think that that is just evidence that it can be done because it is being done. And
Yeah.
you guys are a relatively new agency and you're still doing such an amazing job. So you don't have to have done this for 20 or 30 years to get it right. You really just need to have the right heart and the right mindset for it. And I think you guys really do. And it's been so much fun watching you guys grow over the last couple of years and growing alongside you.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I,
Agreed.
it's it. We're going to have you be the safeguard after. We are not onboarding any agencies right now. We have plenty. We love the partner agencies, but if it happens, they need to come after we've decided whether or not we want to work with them. We're going to send them to you, and you need to
Okay.
do that last little checklist to make sure they understand truly the benefit of
Okay.
having surrogacy is in their corner.
I'm on it. I got
Yeah.
it.
Oh, so good. Well, we are truly honored, Joe, and you and Casey. It's been a lot of fun. We look forward to years to come with this process and being able to grow and be a part of your guys' journey, and likewise, vice versa. So
Yeah.
it's really
Same.
great.
Very much. Very much.
What let's see. I was trying to think. Do we have any additional questions? But I guess what I would love to have you share, Sunshine. Do you have a question?
I
My
did have a question. I
Yeah.
wanted to ask because I know this is something that surrogates consider a lot when they're choosing an agency. What types of intended parents are drawn to New York Surrogacy Center? So, what's the majority of your intended parent clientele? And if a surrogate comes to New York Surrogacy Center, what types of intended parents can she anticipate having as matching options?
That's a great question. Um, I would say that probably 60% or so of our intended parents are typically opposite sex couples. And then maybe 35% same sex couples, and then followed by single intended parents, as far as like that breakdown. Um, Geographically, we have a lot of intended parents in New York or the New York area. So almost exclusively East Coast and predominantly like Northeast. Um, so, especially when we are working with a surrogate who lives not in that area, we definitely talk to them about, are you okay with the idea of travel? Because I don't know who you're going to be working with yet, but they're probably going to be on the East Coast. And I think part of that is our name is New York Surrogacy Center, and we're in New York, and that's just sort of the demographic of intended parents that we typically see. So geographically, that's typically where a lot of our intended parents are. Um, but we work with a lot of different fertility clinics. We don't work with like one particular clinic. We work with whatever clinic the intended parents are working with. And but again, because of where the intended parents are, that's typically where the fertility clinics are too. So we have most of our journeys are take place in the Northeast.
And
I
all of
love
them
seeing.
are
Oh,
domestic,
sorry.
or
Go
are
ahead.
they international intended parents?
At this point, we only do domestic
Okay.
surrogacy journeys, so we don't have any international families at this point. Part of that is because in New York, under New York law, there is a requirement that if you're in order to pursue a surrogacy journey in New York, at least one of the intended parents has to be a resident or a citizen or a lawful permanent resident. So there is not really the possibility of like fully international surrogacy in New York. And so that was one of the reasons. And then we've also just sort of kept it to domestic IPs even for surrogates in other states too. Just for no what reason really other than just convenience factors for everyone, and not to say that that will never be the case, but at least at this point we're comfortable doing just
I
domestic
think it's
surgery.
good to specialize in what you know and to not spread yourself all around. If you have something
Yeah,
that you're really good at, to really
Mhm.
get really good at that and then explore adding on if it makes sense and only when you feel confident that you really have a solid grasp on how to do it
sure.
well. But I was going to
There are
share
so many.
too. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just say there's so many, domestic IPs, and we hear from a lot of surrogates that is something that they really like, to be able to work with someone who's within like a
Mhm.
reasonable distance of them, and just things like time difference and language
Yeah.
barrier, things like that, which are all of course fine, but just little things like that, they can sometimes make a surrogacy journey a little bit more special, especially for someone who's looking to have that type of relationship with her intended
Mhm.
parents. It's more easy to facilitate something like that when you're geographically closer.
Yeah.
But I was gonna share, we have a lot of times it's and recently, I can't even remember who it was, but women that are in maybe Alabama or they're in Texas or they're, wherever they are, they've never dreamed of going to New York City. And then when they share that they've got their flight booked and they're going to New York City for the first time ever, they're so excited to go and do their medical screening or their embryo transfer or whatever it
Yeah,
is. And they're like, I've never been on a plane and I'm going to New York City. And it's just like
yeah,
the excitement is so oh, I love it. I'm just like, "Oh, I'm so excited for you." Like, I wish I could go
right.
with you and
It's
see
like a
New
little
York
little
for your eyes.
vacation. Yeah,
It
So
true. It
cool.
is.
It's
Yeah.
really
yeah,
cool opportunity for women to get to go and see New York. I know I didn't get to go see New York until I was probably like 40, so it's pretty cool city.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
We
that's
always
another
try to
thing surrogates
encourage,
have to look forward to.
especially for New York City, because it is like a place that's interesting to go. So
Uh-huh.
we always try to encourage intended parents, like, she's going to be here for a day or two, like, especially if it's someone who has not been there and doesn't know the areas, like, think of, like, something that either you guys can do together or something that they might want to do. And so some surrogates have gone to like a Broadway show the night before a transfer or something, the
So
IPs like
cool.
set up some just, it's a a nice way to, like, for the IPs to do like a nice gesture to, like, make it an exciting fun thing in addition to the whole
Yeah.
surrogacy process. So
And what a great
uh,
bonding opportunity
yeah,
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure,
It's really
yes.
cool.
And these women are going to take it each part of this journey and these special moments. Medical screening is kind of a special. Then there's the embryo transfer. That's a really special time. But to be able to add that extra layer, I've never been to New York. It's on my list, and I've been to Georgia a few times to now visit Sunshine now that she's
Yeah.
over in Georgia. But it's next on my list. So I think it is special, and it
I'm
adds
going
another
this
additional layer.
weekend.
I
I'm going
know.
on Thursday.
Are you going to the
Yeah.
city?
Yeah, I'm going to see, John Mulaney and Jon Stewart on Friday, and I'm really excited about
Oh,
it.
fun. Oh, that's awesome.
So we're gonna be there Thursday to Sunday, but yeah, I'm gonna try and pack in a bunch of
Yeah,
activities.
Well,
got
you
it.
need to see Joe and Casey one of these weekends since you are
I
so close. You
know.
guys should go
No,
up there and have take
we're
them to
like
dinner.
3 hours away from you. Everybody thinks that, like, New York is New York City, but like we're
Yeah.
like 3 hours up from New York City, but easy enough to get to on a train.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
We
we're excited.
we are so excited for you, and I always like to Sunshine and I always will say, okay, share what would be the one thing you'd like to share with the intended parents that might be listening to the podcast, the surrogates or other professionals. There's a takeaway or something you'd like to share, letting them know about New York Surrogacy Center or really just surrogacy in general.
That's a great question. I think one of the things that we always still are talking to intended parents about is, trying to, like, allay a lot of the fears about surrogacy in New York. There's this whole, like, insurance thing that we talked about. It's also new. And so the law is relatively new. There was a lot of concern initially about, like, how courts were going to, were courts going to issue pre-birth orders, and, like, how long was that process going to take. And anytime there's anything new, it's worrisome. So a lot of intended parents still are a little bit apprehensive about it. But I'm very happy to report to anyone who is interested that it's been very easy so far. The legal process has been super smooth, both through, agency matches that we've been involved in or ones where we've represented the surrogates or the intended parents. It's been super easy to get pre-birth orders in New York, which is great. You don't have to, the intended parents don't have to have a genetic connection. It doesn't matter if they're a straight couple, a gay couple, a single person using donor embryos, donor gametes, whatever. The pre-birth orders are being issued really easily. Usually nobody has to go to court and they're being done like on the papers, super smooth. So, it's to the extent that people are, worried about, how things are going in New York because it's so early. It's been great. The insurance thing is not something that anybody needs to be scared of. And, for women who are thinking of, especially in New York, who are thinking about surrogacy now that it's finally an option, because I've had calls with surrogates who have said like, I've been thinking about doing surrogacy for a long time, but like I couldn't, unless I moved. And, so, it's the fertility clinics there's a lot of good fertility clinics in New York. So it's been going, knock on wood, very, very smoothly. I know that I'm biased because I'm here and but it really has been a very smooth process. So, IPs don't need to be afraid of working with a New York surrogate. They don't need to be afraid of working with the New York agency. But
And there's an extensive volume of surrogates that are in New York that are coming up into the process of saying, okay, now we're ready, So this hopefully will then allow these intended parents to get matched sooner and not have to wait very long, being able to have that process.
Yeah, that's always our hope. And we've been very lucky that we have been able to keep a very reasonable match time for intended parents, due in large part to working with you guys and having such great candidates available. We've been able to keep match times very low, which has been, great, obviously for intended parents, great for surrogates. Everyone, once you get to that point, everyone's just like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to be matched. I'm ready to get this process started. So, it's been good that we've been able to do that.
Yeah. It's beautiful and we love it. We love seeing surrogates so happy to work with New York Surrogacy Center and having amazing journeys, and keep up the good work.
Yeah.
Yes,
we're
thank you.
honored.
And thank you guys. You guys have really created a very unique program that doesn't exist anywhere else. And it was, brilliant. And it's so helpful for, it changes the way that a lot of women, experience the surrogacy process. And that's really important. And so I think that you guys are doing a great thing.
Thank you.
That's our mission. That's our heart and soul, is really making this process better for others than it was for us, really.
Yeah.
And not that it was bad for us when we were surrogates, but there's just so much opportunity for it to be better,
Yeah.
So it's really fun and really heartwarming to see so many women having this amazing experience and doing surrogacy, because it is so brave. So many women that are like, I don't even know anyone who's ever done this. And just, I'm in Alabama. I've never left my state. I'm going to New York. I'm going to carry somebody else's baby. Like here we go. I think these women are so amazing. They're just really incredible human beings. And I love knowing that we're all here to support them, and we're not going anywhere.
No, yeah. This is the beginning. So we're super excited and it's an honor. We look forward to the years to come with you guys.
Ditto. Very much so.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Well,
Joe.
thank you, Joe.
No, thank you guys for having me. This was fun.